This is the Cuisinery podcast, and today we're going to talk about cuisine, its ancient forms and modern impacts. I have with me Small Child, and I am your host, Big Child. This is for Alberto Puertas, because he promised to make our class food if I made a 30-minute podcast about cuisine. We begin in antiquity, time immemorial. Unfortunately, the history and culture of cuisine cannot be fully explored nor defined in only 30 minutes. So we will hit only on some vague points relating to different time periods and cultures. This podcast will be in a two-person, live research format using the work of Lynn Ulver and their timeline published on the internet, and thanks to Perplexity and modern AI tools. You'll notice I used the word there because I don't know what gender they
are. Starting off with the origins of bread. Bread is one of the first, if not the first, form of recipe and widely spread out form of easy cookery or bakery, whatever you want to call it.
What was the first kind of bread?
Unleavened, definitely. It was originated as a simple mixture of flour and water cooked over heat, with the earliest evidence of such dating back to 14,500 years in hunter-gatherers in the Middle East, modern Jordan. And then in 3000 BC, in ancient Egypt, there was the eventual discovery that mixing flour and water and letting it sit allowed wild yeast to ferment the dough, producing the first leavened bread, which transformed the bread from the dense, flat forms to lighter, airier loaves.
So maybe could you explain for some of our listeners what leaven is and what that does to bread?
Unleavened bread is bread without yeast. It is very flat, dense, and chewy. Not Chewbacca. The leavened bread is... Did I say unleavened before?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. Leavened bread is bread with yeast. And it just... yeast raises the dough, makes it airier, so there's less dense, more space, more air in the bread, I suppose. It makes it easier to eat and fluffier.
So something of note is that while the original leaven would have been yeast, because that is a biological ingredient, leaven now can also include sodium bicarbonate, also known as baking soda, or eggs. Eggs also work as a leavening agent.
The social structure or impact of the change to leavened bread is leavened bread was deeply tied to the growth of settlement agricultural societies, enabling population growth, urbanization, and the emergence of complex civilizations, which is pretty interesting because it's a loaf of bread. And, it's pretty cool that the social structure can change so much based on the changing cuisine.
They always say bread is the staff of life. Here's proof. Where did the proof come from? Doesn't matter. Anyway.
In ancient Rome and medieval Europe, the type of bread consumed became a marker of social status, with wider, finer leavened loaves reserved for the wealthy and coarser unleavened or lesser fine breads for the poor, probably due to the cost in yeast or production time or difficulty.
You said that's ancient Rome and medieval Europe?
Yes.
I would assume that, some of that is definitely cost, because I know especially medieval Europe, a lot of peasants would end up using tree bark instead of regular flour, just due to the scarcity of food. It's like in Emperor's New Groove, the peasant comes up, Yzma says, "What is it you wanted again?"
Food.
You should have thought of that before it came peasants. Is that all you have about bread?
Yes, I believe so.
Okay, so moving on from bread now, we're going to talk a little bit about ancient Mesopotamian cuisine. Mesopotamia it's called the cradle of life, I want to say. It's where civilization kind of got its start. So this, if you've ever heard of the Epic of Gilgamesh, this is where that was written. It's where we have the first tablets, I believe, written in cuneiform, that have been preserved from the really, really ancient times, almost 4,000 years ago, to the modern age. And they also had a very unique and interesting cuisine culture. They used grains, legumes, vegetables, fruits, meats, fish, dairy, fats, spices, and herbs. They actually used, archaeologists have found up to 300 different kinds of bread that they used. Again, proving bread is the staff of life. I don't even know 300 different kinds of bread. I don't know if I know 10.
I know about 5, like croissants, bagels, bread,
sourdough.
Unleavened.
Tortillas, I don't know, that's not a bread, is it? They mostly used barley and it says emmer wheat on the site that I'm using for this research. But I don't know exactly what emmer wheat is, as opposed to regular wheat or any other kind of wheat. They used a lot of bread, porridge, and interestingly, they also used beer. I've heard it said that any civilized culture will eventually create an alcoholic beverage, and that's a constant of society, which I think is vaguely amusing. Okay, it turns out emmer is a hybrid species of wheat producing edible seeds that have been used in food since ancient times. I would guess that means that some wheat is not edible. I did not know that. Yeah, they ate a lot of meat and fish. I believe they invented cheese, with over 20 different forms of cheese being part of their diet. A lot of the typical dishes were something like tuhu, a beef and lamb stew with beef, coriander, cumin, and arugula, which is actually written in cuneiform tablets, one of the first recipes ever created, especially one of the first ever written down. And we actually still have that recipe today. So if you want to, you can look up, it's TUH''U, and probably make that if you want. They also had other recipes for breads, cakes, porridge, pies, sweets. They used dates and honey mostly for those sweets, those desserts. Dates are a kind of fruit. They taste very good. Honey never goes bad, actually, interestingly. They found honey in Egyptian pharaohs' tombs that you can still eat today.
Oh.
And that was like 4,000 years ago they put it in there.
Wonder if they marked up the price and sold that to people, like, eat ancient Egyptian honey. It's good for you.
Organic, probably. One other thing that I wanted to know was I wanted to know about crop improvement and selective breeding in ancient Mesopotamia. So I looked it up, and they actually did most likely selectively breed crops. This has been practiced since agriculture was a thing in human culture. They selected plants that showed desirable traits such as higher yield, resistance to drought, or better taste, interestingly, and replanting those seeds in subsequent seasons as opposed to the seeds that were less tasty or would die if they had no water or just had lesser yield. And so actually the crops that we have today, though we call them natural, even if we don't biologically, genetically engineer them in the classical sense now, have been engineered towards their current state by generations and generations of successive humans.
Is that all you have on Mesopotamia?
That's all I'm going to talk about, yeah.
Sweet. All right. Moving on to ice cream, which isn't actually a more modern invention. It was actually made in the 7th to 10th centuries AD in the Tang dynasty in ancient China. Back then, the frozen dessert was made by fermenting milk from buffalo, cows, or goats, mixing it with flour and flavorings like camphor, and refrigerating it for serving. Earlier, around 200 BC, the Chinese also created frozen treats by mixing rice and milk, then freezing them with snow, which I believe would be the more popular approach to making ice cream in that ancient time, because I don't think they had refrigerators. Then in ancient Persia, 400 BC, falude, a chilled dessert of vermicelli, rosewater and fruit, was cooled with mountain ice. And then the Greeks and Romans also enjoyed their own version of ice cream.
So rosewater is essentially just rose tea, in case you're wondering.
Okay. Greeks and Romans enjoyed snow mixed with honey and fruit, a luxury for the elite. The evolution towards modern ice cream accelerated in medieval Arab cultures, where I believe they started making sorbet. I believe that originated in medieval Arab.
Sorbet, really?
Yeah. By freezing fruit juices and whizzing it up.
Well, how did they freeze that in the Middle East?
I wouldn't know. I assume...
Let me find out.
Well, he's looking that up. The cultural impact of ice cream was... especially early on when it was first being invented, it was hard to keep cool and it was hard to make, obviously, especially in the Middle East. So it was a symbol of wealth and sophistication, and for the nation it was a symbol of technological prowess to be able to keep something so frozen for long enough to enjoy it by the nobles. And the pursuit of ice cream drove further technological advancements in ice harvesting, storage, and eventually refrigeration, influencing broader food preservation methods. So I guess it could be attributed to ice cream
the invention of the
refrigeration.
refrigerator.
Yeah.
Yeah. So actually, having looked it up, it looks like in ancient Middle Eastern history, and especially in the arid regions of Persia, and well, Persia is essentially the Middle East, they would create something called a yakchal, meaning ice pit, which was created to store ice year-round, especially in desert climates. The water was channeled from rivers or melting snow into shallow pools near the yakchal. The clear desert nights allowed the water to freeze due to radiative cooling. And so they actually created something very similar to how refrigerators work today, which is actually, I believe, also through radiative cooling. Is this idea that water removes more heat when it evaporates than it takes, which means that it will cool substances down. That's the general principle behind refrigerators.
That's very interesting. Thank you.
You're so welcome.
As ice cream became more popular and easier to produce, it kind of became like it democratized.
Democratized?
Thank you. Pleasure in a way, as the treat reserved for nobles became more widely spread across the among population. It kind of it gave a certain democratic sense of pleasure to the people, especially in the 19th century and onwards to now.
And so something I actually thought was really interesting about that was just how early ice cream was. We layered this in a way by the timeline's explanation of which came first. And so we had bread, Mesopotamian cuisine, and finally ice cream is the third one that showed up. It was essentially one of the very, very first recipes on the timeline, so to speak. And I thought it was fascinating just how early ice cream came into being. But if we move on now to the biblical era, this is an era of great advancement in a lot of different features. And I wanted to actually talk a little bit about what Christ would have eaten if he was on the earth. So he would have been in Galilee and Judea, and they had a very specific diet. Bread, obviously, mostly barley and wheat, dipped in olive oil, as they do in the East. I was actually introduced to this idea by a man on my mission named Brother King, who told us that the proper way to eat bread was actually to dip it in olive oil with a vinaigrette in the olive oil. It tastes really good. I would highly recommend. He would have eaten legumes like lentils, chickpeas, or beans, often cooked into stews or pottages.
Isn't legumes
Legumes?
just French for vegetable?
I don't speak French, so I cannot accurately answer that question. But if it is, that's kind of funny. Because the next one is fruits and vegetables: figs, dates, grapes, pomegranates, apples, and melons. We know about when he curses the fig tree, the allegory of the fig tree, so we know that those are big things. We also know that there was a lot of olives in the area at that time. There would have been fish living near the Sea of Galilee. I mean, his first disciples were fishermen, right? So there was a lot of fish. There was apparently some dairy. We know that he turned water into wine, and there's honey, which appears to be the primary sweetener of pre-modernity. But we talk about other areas, and it's honestly very similar. There's a lot of bread around that area. When you input biblical cuisine into an AI search engine, it's usually going to focus around biblical areas, which is, the Middle East. It's Israel, Jordan, Palestine. It's Saudi Arabia. It's Egypt, and so that's kind of what I got out of this. I would love to know maybe a little bit more about the Orient, such as Chinese cuisine at this time. Most likely rice, I would assume, but we don't have time to dive into that right now. I would also love to know about the Olmecs in Mexico and what they would have been eating. Again, we don't have time to dive into that right now, but maybe sometime in the future.
Promise of more food.
Promise of more food, exactly.
Is that all for that?
Quite so, my dear
biblical?
fellow.
Sweet. Going kind of along with the biblical era is the ancient Rome cuisine, which is pretty interesting because it seems like ancient Rome was the first city or the first time where we have such a diverse palette available to the people, especially the nobility, of course. As ancient Rome was quite large and expanded quite a lot. especially with their massive trade system, they were able to get many diverse different diverse diets from many places they were trading with, featuring grains, vegetables, fruits, seafood, and for the wealthy a variety of meats and imported delicacies. I wonder if they imported ice cream or if they made that themselves. I feel like importing ice cream would be a little hard because it would, especially back then,
melt. Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, what are you gonna do? Put it in hay on the back of a horse?
I mean, maybe if you can
It's not gonna work very well.
stick a whole bunch of ice in a room so it melts over time, but less, then you just stick ice cream in the middle.
I would assume they made it, honestly. I know
that might be. Yeah.
they probably had influences from the East where they would have had those ice pits, likely since they did conquer much of the known world at the time.
Yeah, that's true. Some of the influential recipes from ancient Rome was puls, Puls, a foundational porridge made from emmer wheat, which I guess it comes up once in a while, water, salt, and fat, and then later enriched with olive oil, vegetables, eggs, cheese, honey, and occasionally meat or fish. And I guess that recipe alone speaks of the diversity of the ingredients they had access to, with all of the different meats, fish. They had obvious access to Italy, right? They had obvious access to ocean food, seafood, and also
Being a peninsula, of course.
yeah, and lots of wine and grapes. As
They were a wine-bibbing people, you might say.
Yes. Then the social stratification is food was a marker of class, and it appears to be that way throughout history, where always the nobility has the best food, and it is a staple to the country. It is a symbol for neighboring countries and all as well. If the nobility are able to eat better food, then it is kind of like a symbol of their country's stability and their country's power, in a way. However
Absolutely.
great that symbol may be.
Yeah. One thing I was actually interested in, and I just looked it up, was which Roman dishes we actually still eat today. And according to AI, there's pasta alla carbonara, cacio e pepe, y saltimboccia alla romana, which are the iconic staples of Roman cuisine. Again, I'm just reading this off the AI. If you want to know a little bit more, pasta alla carbonara is a simple dish made of spaghetti, eggs, guanciale, which is cured pork jowl, pecorino, which is a Roman cheese, and black pepper. Cacio e pepe is a spaghetti, Roman cheese, and black pepper. So it's very, very simple things. I think I've actually eaten some of these, except without the specifically Roman cheese. Bucatini alla matriciana is a pasta of guanciale, which, as I mentioned earlier, is pork jowl, tomato, chili flakes, and pecorino romano. And so those are just some of the things that we're still eating today, actually, from ancient Rome, interestingly enough.
That is very interesting.
Spaghetti.
One of some of the lasting influences of Roman cuisine was bread, cheese, olive oil, wine, and sauces all became foundational to later Mediterranean and European diets. And then techniques such as fermentation, pickling, and the use of herbs and spices spread widely through Roman influence, which makes sense because I guess as the nobility spread along the vast Roman Empire, they brought their cuisine with them, I suppose. That makes sense, I guess, and it's pretty cool.
Yeah.
And I believe that is all I have on ancient Rome.
Okay, well, ancient Rome affected in large part the Western world, but let's shift a little bit more over to the East. And I'm going to talk a little bit about Korean cuisine. Something interesting about Korean cuisine is they also had fermented foods like it turned out the Romans did. If you've ever heard of kimchi, which I believe is fermented cabbage, doenjang, which is soybean paste, and ganjang, which is soy sauce, are something that they actually eat over there a lot. They eat millet, barley, and later the rice was introduced, I believe from China. Also chili peppers and fermented fish sauces and soy sauces. If you know anything about Thai culture, they also have a lot of fermented fish pastes, which I am told are horrible to the taste. but you eat them to prove how Thai you are, I guess. The pickled and salted things, they would make rice cakes, pine nut porridge, abalone porridge. Don't know what that is. For vegetables, they had wild greens, root, and cultivated vegetables in soup, stews, and side dishes. So that would be things like cabbage, like broccoli. They'd also probably have ginseng and ginger in a lot of these things. Meals were generally in a communal setting, which I believe is common throughout history. If you have group meals, it was highly ritualized. And then looking back a little bit further south and east, if we go to the Tokugawa Japan, otherwise known as Edo period, when it was a time of peace and stability under the Tokugawa shogunate. So there was a lot of actually cultural growth during this time, and a lot of different social changes that were instituted during the Tokugawa period in Japan. They kept eating rice. Obviously, rice was grown mostly in I can't remember where exactly. It was sold in Osaka. I remember that, and shipped out to Tokyo, which at the time was called not Kyoto. I can't remember. Anyway, long story short, they created the road called the Tokaido Road, which allowed for a lot of goods and markets and consumers to travel to and from markets, which allowed for a lot of different food identities being made throughout Japan. There was a lot of pickled vegetables, similar to if we look at Korea, they had a lot of the same things. A lot of fish. As we know, when you're on the island or near a beach, you're always going to be eating fish, apparently. As almost everyone throughout history has, they eat fish. So if you don't like fish, you are wrong. They grilled, steamed, simmered, and fried a lot. Also used soy sauce like the Koreans, and used a lot of vinegar actually as a seasoning. They created a culture of dining out and street food, actually, which I guess that's where that came from. So there you go. You can thank the Tokugawa shogunate for creating that for you.
If I may, real quick, something that I found curious, and so I looked it up, was the ginseng root that he mentioned earlier was used for I think it still is, but was used for medicinal purposes, and was supposed to be good for you. So that kind of sparked another question, and I guess the first country in ancient history to first begin using herbs for medicinal purposes was ancient Mesopotamia, which is pretty interesting. It seems like Mesopotamia did a lot of stuff.
Yeah, well, it was the hotbed of culture, right? Because it was so fertile there, they were actually able to settle down and grow crops. So they were the first area that we know of to have moved from a hunter-gatherer society to agricarian, which is essentially you're sitting down, you're settling your family down on a property, and you're just growing food there. Right. And so we have the first documented cities in Mesopotamia. We have the first documented writing styles in Mesopotamia. We have the first documentation of people growing food for to be eaten, as opposed to just finding what they can and eating that.
Interesting. That's fairly interesting.
Mesopotamia is a wonderful place. I've never been.
Cool. Moving on to going far west now to the ancient Americas.
Or further east, depending on your point of view.
Yeah, no, that's fair. Specifically the Mayans, Incans, and Aztecs. So going into each one independently. So the Mayans, they had a diet centered on maize or corn, beans, and squash, which was apparently called the Three Sisters. That was supplemented by chili peppers, sweet potatoes, fruits, fish, and wild game. They pioneered masa, processed maize flour dough, tamales, and underground pit cooking, or I guess pib, and domesticated stingless bees for honey. That sounds really nice, actually.
That does sound very nice.
The maize was... Maize, sorry. Maize was so central...
It's okay, he speaks French, not Spanish.
Perfect. Maize was so central that Mayan myths describe humans being created from corn, which is
that makes
really
sense.
Interesting.
Yeah, in the game Tzolk'in, the Mayan calendar, there's corn is everything.
Yep.
Like if you don't have corn, you lose.
That's kind of hard. And blue skulls, but that's
different story.
And then the Aztec diet was also built mostly on maize, beans, squash. They also had amaranth, chia, tomatoes, and chili peppers. They developed nixtamalization, alkaline processing of maize, enhancing nutrition.
I don't think they called it nixtamalization, though.
Probably
at the time.
not.
Or alkaline processing of maize. It probably just said something about, we're going to make this taste better, or whatever that means.
Right. Then the common foods in Aztec was apparently tortillas, tamales, and
Maize
solely
gruels.
corn gruels. Great. And they also had cacao-based drinks flavored with spices and honey.
And so the Aztecs and the Mayans were actually both in the Central America region, which is Guatemala, Honduras, and Mexico, I believe. And so you actually see a lot of this culture that carries over to modernity.
Like the
obviously.
tortillas.
Obviously. Tamales are actually a great impact that they've had too. For every single Christmas, a Mexican tradition is actually to make a bunch of tamales and well, at least where I was in Texas, this seemed to be the case, was to share it with all your neighbors, right? So you'd make, 50, 100 tamales, and you'd spread the love, right? And it was actually a wonderful tradition that's been carried down for a long, long time, apparently.
Very nice. And their introduction of cacao-based drinks
Hot cocoa.
makes me wonder if they were the first people to use chocolate, which seems reasonable and likely.
Yeah, I would say in a form they're definitely the first person to use chocolate, because it looks like they honeyed up their drinks, their little cacao drinks. So it's probably tasted somewhat similar to chocolate. Well, I would say very dark chocolate that we have today. I don't think jungle dirt chocolate. But yeah, absolutely, chocolate dirt.
And as we've seen with all of the different kingdoms and empires, Aztec foodways reinforced social hierarchies. So cacao drinks were reserved for the elites, while pulque, a fermented maguey drink, was for commoners. Their agricultural methods and dietary staples shaped Mexican cuisine and contributed globally, especially through the introduction of maize, tomatoes, and chocolate. Now the Incans, their diet was based on potatoes, maize, quinoa, beans, and native tubers, complemented by guinea pig, llama, and fish.
So that actually holds up pretty true today still. The Incas were in Ecuador and Peru, I would say mostly, but they made it down to Upper Chile, and I believe they were also in parts of Bolivia. They were high up in the mountains, and they ate a lot of potatoes. Almost every potato variety you could think of was there. So if you have a Peruvian dish now, whereas most dishes in Latin American culture will come with rice, the Peruvians will give you rice and potatoes. There's always a potato on the plate.
Nice.
Which is pretty cool. And they have
potatoes.
So many different kinds of potatoes, which is crazy. That was their biggest complaint. When I would talk to a Peruvian, I'd say, well, what do you not like about America? And they'd say, you don't have enough potatoes.
Cool. Some of the lasting influences on today is that maize, potatoes, tomatoes, chili peppers, cacao, and quinoa are all decimated. Quinoa. Oh, all domesticated by these civilizations are now essential ingredients worldwide.
Yeah, so corn, actually, the introduction of corn into the old world, which constitutes Asia, Africa, Europe, and Oceania, actually allowed for a population explosion over there, the likes of which has not necessarily been equaled, with the exception, obviously, of the Industrial Revolution, which you could argue was originated because there were potatoes and corn now. We only have like a minute and a half left before we can be done. So I'm just going to skip Viking foods, baklava, pasta, and Napoleon's chicken Marengo, and go straight to the World War food impacts. So during the World Wars, obviously, there was a lot of stuff going on. A lot of people dying, a lot of rationing, a lot of stay-at-home orders. So they both led to strict rationing of staples like meat, butter, sugar, eggs, and wheat. I actually read that there was a cookbook called 55 Different Ways to Save Eggs during this time period because these things were so scarce. There were things like war cakes made without eggs or dairy, and the use of vegetable shortening instead of lard. So you started replacing these previously essential ingredients with entirely other and new things. Some recipes were born out of necessity. Things like stuffed peppers, fruit cobblers, and Kraft macaroni and cheese were actually all invented due to the World Wars.
Oh, and so were boiled boot leather.
And so was boiled boot leather. Actually, I think that was probably invented in a different war prior to that. People have been eating boot leather for a long time.
That's fair. Kraft macaroni and cheese.
Kraft macaroni and cheese was a dish from the World Wars.
Interesting.
Which I did not know either. But they also rose... these wars gave rise to a thing called convenience foods. You probably know them better as TV dinners, instant mashed potatoes, powdered eggs, which kind of have infiltrated daily living everywhere. On to you, small child.
Cool. Something that I thought was could be interesting was looking at the social media impact on food culture, like the introduction of social media and how that impacted how food is looked at. And basically, it's exchange of information, cultural shifts, and global, it just basically dishes were now worldwide, like kind of no matter where you were, because like everyone could look at a tweet that you made about your dish and be like, hey, that looks good and I want to try that. And then you just like, I don't know, you make it, or they make it, you share the recipe, they make it, they eat it, they enjoy it, or they don't, depends. Perhaps on their ability to cook. But it also changes like health, sustainability, and social values. People were emphasizing they were more health conscious and looking for more sustainable eats, like plant-based meats, zero waste dining, and eco-friendly sourcing.
Eco-friendly.
Eco. Yeah. Eco, same thing, right?
Eco.
Basically social media just increased the information given and the information dish. Spaghetti.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I could see how that would lead to a lot of cross-cultural sharing, to the point where now, in America, you can look up pretty much any dish you want, any culture you want, and it'll show up and you can make a recipe from ancient Mesopotamia or modern-day Rome.
Right.
It doesn't really matter. You can pick that up from social media, from the internet. And so, with thanks to anyone and everyone who may or may not have listened, this has been Cuisinery, the podcast that makes a vague amount of sense and contains way too much information. Brother Puertas, please make us food. You have anything to add?
Nope.
Okay, bye.
Food.